Hello and welcome to the Philosopher's Angle, your daily French philosophical take on the news headlines. This is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of the philosophers discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, October 22nd, 2024, a Metropolitan Police firearms officer, Sergeant Martin Blake, has been acquitted of murder after shooting an unarmed suspect, Chris Kaba, 24, in the head in September 2022. The verdict sparked anger from Kaba's family and supporters, who claimed it gave police impunity to kill. The commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley, called the system broken and said it punishes officers for doing their job. The acquittal has fueled demands for reform of the system, with police chiefs lobbying ministers to make it harder for such trials to happen again. Kaba's family vowed to continue fighting for justice, saying Chris's life mattered and that they would not be silenced. Commentary inspired by the writings of Michel Foucault. The Web of Power: How Institutions Perpetuate Injustice. In the aftermath of Sergeant Martin Blake's acquittal for the murder of unarmed suspect Chris Kaba, a familiar narrative has emerged, one of outrage, anger, and demands for reform. But beneath this surface-level reaction lies a more insidious reality, one that speaks to the very fabric of our institutions. As I see it, the acquittal is not just a miscarriage of justice, but a manifestation of a broader systemic malaise, one that perpetuates inequality, violence, and racism. In his seminal work, Discipline and Punish: The Birth of the Prison, Michel Foucault wrote about the vast network of power that extends beyond the walls of institutions. This network is comprised of judges, doctors, sociologists, and prison wardens, all working in concert to maintain social order and control. In the context of the Kaba case, we see this network at play. The police, the courts, and the media all worked together to produce a narrative that exonerated Sergeant Blake and absolved him of responsibility for Chris Kaba's death. But power is not something that can be reduced to individual actors or institutions. As Foucault noted in Power's Knowledge, Selected Interviews and Other Writings, 1972 to 1977, power is exercised from a multitude of points in the interplay of non-egalitarian and mobile relations. It is a complex web of relationships that produces and reinforces dominant norms and values. In this case, the power dynamics at play are those of racism, classism, and institutional privilege. The acquittal of Sergeant Blake sends a chilling message that the lives of Black people, particularly young men like Chris Kaba, are disposable and can be taken without consequence. This is not just a product of individual prejudice or ideology. It is also a technology for managing populations and making them conform to certain norms. As Foucault would argue, racism is not just an aberration, but a fundamental feature of our institutions. The commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley, has called the system broken and claimed that it punishes officers for doing their job. But this is a classic example of misdirection. The problem is not with individual officers or even the police force as a whole. It is with the very institution of policing itself. As Foucault noted in The Archaeology of Knowledge, institutions are not just external constraints on individual behavior, but also shape individual subjectivity and reinforce dominant power structures. In this case, the institution of policing has produced and reinforced a culture of impunity, where officers feel entitled to use deadly force without consequence. This is not just a product of inadequate training or procedures, it is a fundamental feature of the institution itself. The demands for reform that have followed the acquittal are well-intentioned, but ultimately misguided. They focus on tweaking individual components of the system rather than challenging its underlying logic. We need to think more fundamentally about how we want our institutions to function and what values we want them to reflect. As Chris Kaba's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice, they are not just seeking accountability for his death. They are also challenging the very web of power that produced it. They are demanding a world where Black lives matter, where police officers are held accountable for their actions, and where institutions serve the people rather than perpetuating inequality and violence. In this sense, the acquittal of Sergeant Blake is not just a setback. It is an opportunity to challenge the status quo and build a more just society. As Foucault would argue, power is exercised from a multitude of points, but so too can resistance be mobilized. We must continue to push against the web of power that perpetuates injustice and work towards a world where all lives are valued equally. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Philosopher's Angle. Be sure to come back tomorrow for another reflective take